Today we're putting skid plates on our 2018 JLU. Follow along as we install them. This is Jeepingmo. We went with these Quadratec engine and transfer case skid plates. Pretty easy install, as you'll see. They're 6 millimeters thick, so that's almost a 1/4 inch. Pretty beefy. Okay, so we went with these aluminum skids, trying to keep the weight down on it. They do come with a pretty beefy mounting bar, and these are all from Quadratec except for the diff skid, and that's from Northridge. So that's a pretty beefy mount on the rear, and then it runs up to the engine mounts. These were all products that we purchased. We would like some sponsorship, but we didn't have any on this one. So it comes with these two brackets, and they go up towards the engine mounts. And then the pan actually bolts onto the bottom half, so you're actually anchored all the way up to the frame. We had some other options, but some of them actually have you bolt right onto the existing pan. That didn't quite seem right. So let's crawl under and see what we gotta do. Okay, so what they have you do is bolt up to the engine mount. They give you these nice flag nuts, slide up behind there, and those drop down, which is pretty good design. So we'll get these bolted on and show you how it goes. Okay, so the brackets are a little different for each side. One of them you have to get around this mount. So they give you, these are slotted, so you can slide it up under, at least to get you started. You'll find these mounts go in pretty easy. The whole thing only takes maybe half hour, 45 minutes to install. Alright, so we got one side in. Now let's get the other side on. It's kind of nice, they flag these nuts, and one of them's got a slot so you can slide it up in there. Whoever designed this system to use those flag nuts and the slots to hold the brackets when you put them on really did a great job on that. Okay, so those are on. Trying to somewhat go by the manual because this is a stick, not an automatic. Since we were putting on a transfer case skid, we had to take off the factory one. Comes off pretty easy, and all the hardware bolts right back into those locations. The brace is supposed to go into the existing. Make sure to use anti-seize when you're putting all this stuff back together. You're going to drag it through the mud and the water, and it's going to rust up, and you're going to want to take it off at some point in time. I'll put everything in the descriptions below, so if you want to buy any of it, it's all down there. Okay, so these bolt into the existing nuts on the frame, so I'm guessing those are for the automatic. Lifted the pan up in there and did a test fit. We got to start getting it in there. I like how all the bolts were recessed up in the pan. Even the bolts for the little access for the oil drain plug, that was all recessed. Pretty clean design. Okay, so one thing you got to pay attention to is the bolt locations for your gas tank skid. Right? So with that, let's get it in. You can use your impact gun on a lot of spots, but when it comes to that fuel tank skid, maybe a little squirt of PB Blaster, and take those off by hand so you don't break them off. This will slide right up under the existing. The skid plates are like a modular unit. You can add one or both. You can put them on in any order. As far as if you get the transmission, you can come back and get the engine. And they also make a gas tank skid, which we'll be looking at next.
Okay, so let's get these tightened up. Now, this is where the swivel head really comes in handy. It's nice. There's a nice door, trap door here.
Quadratec did a nice job putting in this access door for the oil drain. It's just as thick as the rest of the pan. It has these really nice steel riv inserts in there, so you don't have to worry about trying to thread into aluminum. It doesn't gald up. It's a pretty beefy setup. They did a good job with it.
Be able to change your oil. The last thing we'll do is we'll tighten up the mounts where it goes into the frame. Okay, so let's kind of go over some of the key features of these skid plates. This is a really nice little access door for the oil pan, so you can change your oil. Everything's recessed. The other thing I really liked about these is that it actually connects to your frame up by the motor mounts. You're not having to take off oil pan bolts or anything else. It's tied back to the frame. And then all your bolts, there's a little recess in here, so as you're sliding over things, the bolts are up inside. You don't have to worry about grabbing a bolt and ripping up off. And the only time that really can happen is if it drops down in this area. Well, you might have a little bit of an issue with that, but for the most part, you know, all the bolts are recessed. It's a feature so it can drain mud and water out. Well, water at least, maybe not mud. The crossbars, pretty beefy, right? So you really can't go wrong with this setup. And then the bar that goes in for the transfer case, it bolts right up into your existing, you know, fuel tank skid, so that works out really nice. It's pretty modular. It just tucks up underneath, and when we get the other skid plate for the fuel tank, it'll just bolt right up in there as well. Pretty easy assembly, not a lot of work. So check out that Quadratec skid plate. It was a pretty good buy. It's about 6 millimeters thick, almost 1/4 inch. Pretty beefy. You're not gonna worry about, you know, it's not aluminum foil, so you don't have to worry about that. Then we had bought these Rancho diff covers. They're pretty nice. There's a couple bolts in the back. You take your cover bolts out and they go through there. There's a strap across the front of the housing. So the front bolt it's the same for front and back. Get a couple bolts on the front. You had a strap across the back. And this does have the drain hole for the bottom because that's where the drain's at. So that's just a Rancho front and rear. And then you have the engine skid and the transfer case skids. Okay, so one thing you always want to make sure, because we do abuse these things, dragging through mud and water, anytime you have screws or bolts, put just a little bit of anti-seize on the threads. Now these skid plates have steel inserts in them, so you don't have the galding, but just a little bit of anti-seize goes a long way, and information will be in the descriptions. So always try to use some anti-seize. We had already put on these rough country rear control arm skids. Pretty easy install, control arm bolt and shock bolt. They go right on. Pretty nice install, keeps it from getting beat up. We'd also installed these rock hard front control arm skids. Also pretty easy to install. You got to remove the control arm bolts, and there's tabs that are folded up and slide right over the front of the bracket that holds the nose of it. If you like this video, check out some of the other videos that'll pop up here. Don't forget we have merchandise. Until next time, this is Jeepingmo. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share.